Hey everybody, Clay Archer, CEO DVC Technology, and I've got a great one today. Today we're going to cover the new ENVR Core. As you may know, we've been running an ENVR here at DVC Technology for a long time, and we've used every NVR here except for the NVR Instant, going all the way back to the UNVR. So when Ubiquiti offered to send out an ENVR Core, I jumped at the opportunity. So in this video, we're going to go ahead and get it unboxed and installed. We'll walk through the specs, we'll jump into the software and go through the differentiating features, and then we'll discuss who this device is for. And TLDR here, for $49.99, if you're not doing an enterprise install or you have less than 74K cameras, this probably isn't the system for you. But let's go ahead and cover what's in the box and get this thing racked up. So in the box, you're going to find the unit itself. You're going to find a set of rack rails, which you're going to need. This is a very heavy unit, especially when you fill it out with drives. There are the power cables, and there's a little box of mounting accessories. And last but not least, there is a really attractive bezel included in the box, which mounts the front of the unit. On the front of the unit are the integrated handles, just like on the ENVR. There are 16 drive bays, there are a few slots at the top for ventilation, and there's the recessed reset button. One thing of note, there's no port for an electronic bezel on the front, so the bezel that comes with it is the only bezel that will work with this unit. The bezel itself just clicks right in. It is very attractive in my opinion, and at the bottom of it there is a little access port that you can use, one of those UniFi tools, to push in to release the bezel. It actually locks in and you cannot remove it without that tool. On to the back from left to right, there is an RJ45 management port. There are two 25 gig SFP28 ports. There are two SFF 8644 expansion ports, and there are two hot swappable 550 watt power supplies, just like the ENVR. Those are the same that are used in the ENAS and the EF Core, both of which I've recently reviewed. I'll put those links down in the description below. And as I mentioned in those videos, you could keep one of these power supplies as a cold spare, and if any of those units had a power supply failure, obviously it would roll over to the redundant power supply, but you'd have that cold spare on hand just to swap that out quickly. So that is a nice feature, and it is nice to have that same power supply in all of these units. Above the power supplies, you'll find 5 internal fans, and in my use, other than turning the unit on, the hard drives themselves are louder than the fans, so take that for what it's worth. For setting up the unit, I apologize, I forgot to record it, but it is a very easy process. You can go back to one of my other NVR videos, of my ENVR video, which I'll link down in the description, and see how to adopt the unit. It's relatively easy to do. I did, however, capture some B-roll of me adopting all the cameras. I just went into the ENVR and removed them one by one, and then they were ready to adopt into the new ENVR Core. I did do a whole fresh setup on the ENVR Core, but I did move my drives over from the ENVR to the ENVR Core. That process was pretty easy. I'm not going to cover it in this video because I think that's a pretty unique use case. But you can take your drives out of the ENVR and put them into the ENVR Core. So with that, let's jump into the software real quick, and I'm going to compare the ENVR Core to the ENVR and what are the major differences here. One thing right off the bat with this philosophy of the EF Core and the ENVR Core, what does this core mean? And what I think they're talking about there is this is going to be a core unit that is scalable out. So think of this as kind of the brains and the foundation of your Protect system and the ability to add cameras and capacity to this one base unit. So for the ENVR, where you're going to max out at 70 cameras, this one will let you scale beyond that and add storage beyond that through the storage unit. So that core meaning is kind of like it is the base and the brain, and it's got enough power to add to it as you're going to grow. So that in mind, let's jump in and take a look at the spec comparisons. One thing right off the bat to take notice of is the depth. The ENVR Core is 550 millimeters versus 480 millimeters. So that extra depth may mean you need more room in your rack. So definitely take notice of that. In imperial terms, that is 3 inches deeper there, and that will make a difference in certain racks. The big headliner is the number of cameras. We go from 210 to 500 in HD. We go from 140 to 400 in 2K, and we go from 70 to 300 in 4K. That's somewhere between 2 and 4.5 times as many cameras, depending on the install. Which is quite a big difference. Managed access hubs is 300 plus versus 300. A lot of installs that are going to use these units are also going to pair access, so having more capacity there is definitely a plus. Obviously, the internal storage for the unit itself is the same. One question I saw this come up a lot on Reddit and Facebook is there is no longer a 10 gigabit RJ45 connection. It is all 25 gig SFP28 ports. I think at this enterprise level, everybody is going to have SFP connections, but I would check with your install and make sure you have have the right connectivity, because this unit just does have those two SFP28 25 gig ports and the 1 gigabit management port. The biggest differentiator, of course, is going to be able to run these two expansion modules with the two SFF 8644 ports, and this will give you a maximum capability of running 48 hard drives in your unit, which is pretty impressive. For power consumption, one note real quick, I think this 410 watts includes the hard drives, and this 237 watts doesn't include the hard drive, because obviously there's more RAM and more processing power in this unit. I don't think it's that much more efficient. I could be wrong on that, but I'm assuming this unit will use more power. The other two headliners here are the processor and RAM. Obviously, to be able to scale to that many drives and that many cameras, it's going to need more processing power and more RAM, and it does get that. It has the 128 core ARM V8.2 at 2.6 processor versus the 8-core ARM at 2.5 gigahertz for the Enterprise NVR. And along with that, it gets a bump up to 64 gigabytes of memory versus 32 gigabytes of memory. As I mentioned before, there is no display option on the Enterprise ENVR Core. That is only on the ENVR. And you can see it's 9 pounds heavier than the original unit, and it's got a little bit tighter operational envelope here. One last quick thing before we jump into the software, you might want to play with this capacity calculator and see where your installation falls. It's always kind of nice to use this to see what you may need and how things are going to scale out. One thing I will mention here is they need to add the expansion units to this capacity calculator. You can only use the internal storage on the unit itself, but you can play around with the number of access hubs you're going to use, the number of cameras, and kind of play around with how your storage is going to work out. It's a nice little tool. Like I said, it probably needs a little tweak for the ENVR Core just because of the capacity of those expansion bays. But let's jump into the software real quick, and I'll show you a few differences here between the ENVR and the ENVR Core. So you can see here in my fabric here, I've got the ENVR and I've got the ENVR Core. We're currently here logged into the ENVR Core, and it looks very similar, to tell you the truth. You won't see a ton of difference in just the interface of the unit itself. Everything kind of looks the same. You can see here I've got 7 months and 5 days worth of recordings here, and I'm running 33 cameras here at the moment. There are a few differences here, and I'm going to go into settings here and show you under storage. And yes, the eagle-eyed amongst you, I do have a drive in here that I need to replace. That is showing me risk of failure. Well, that's not really cool for me right now with the price of hard drives. It is kind of interesting to show you guys what it looks like. But you'll see here under storage that we have these expansion units now, and that we're able to set up those expansion units. I don't have one plugged in right now, but you'll see that that's where they show up. So that's a new feature that we haven't seen before. You'll see that here. One other place you'll notice it here is if I go under AI Turret, or any camera for that matter, I can choose which expansion port that it is going to record to. So that's pretty interesting. So if I have a larger install, I can put certain cameras to certain expansion ports. But for the most part, that's the main difference here. There isn't a lot of difference between the ENVR and the ENVR Core, other than obviously the more processing power. This is a snappy unit, but my ENVR was a snappy unit. The ability to add more cameras, and the ability to tell the cameras which expansion unit to record to. So who is this unit for? Right off the bat, this is not for a hobbyist or a home user. This is for a serious enterprise, and it's probably not for 99% of small businesses. Most people looking at this would be better served with an Enterprise NVR or an NVR G2 Pro. So I would look at those two units. There is an NVR for everybody in this lineup. I did a quick Excel spreadsheet, and you can see how they stack up against each other side by side. But for those of you that are going over 70 cameras, or you have a really dense install and you need a lot of storage, I think this unit scales very well. And the ability to have everything in one unit with the processing power and the RAM to handle it is a really nice option. So I'm thinking a high density campus, a big warehouse, a multiple tens of thousands of square foot office space where you have a lot of access control and a lot of cameras, and you want to be able to scale that if you add another floor to the office building or you add an adjacent building. Those are the types of installs where this will make sense. This is overkill for my 10,000 square foot office space. And the only reason I'm running it is Ubiquiti was nice enough to send it out to me for this comparison. So what do you think of the ENVR Core? If you have any comments or questions, please put those down below. I get to all of them, and it's great to have those conversations down there. As always, please like and subscribe, and we'll see you guys in the next video.